aloha and welcome to Island Connections, co-sponsored by the University of Hawai'i Ethnic Studies Department and Information Technology Services. The show is titled Gambling on the Economy. And with us today we have two guests to talk about that. Larry Meacham, he's a spokesperson for Common Cause. Thanks for coming, Larry.
Thank you.
And Noel Kent, he's professor of ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii. And the show is live on the air, and we'd love to hear from you, comments, questions, what have you. The number to call is 956-5670 on Oahu, and neighbor islands is 1-800-342-7949. So please give us a call and let us know what you think and so forth. First, I'd like to go to the Elmo and show a book that Noel came out with in 2000, and it's called America in 1900. And I just want to ask Noel, why is it that you wrote about America in 1900 in 2000, in the year 2000, and what kind of impact does it have, or what kind of relationship does it have to what's happening right now, whether in Hawaii or globally?
Well, on one hand, I was trying to, in a very opportunistic way, trying to ride the millennial wave, you know, and get a bestseller. That didn't quite happen, of course. But I think a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues that we have in America today, the problems with racism, with concentration of corporate power, with the widening gulf between rich and poor people, all began to become evident around 1900. And a lot of the ways in which we failed to solve or failed to resolve those issues have come back to haunt us today. So this is sort of a study of policy over time and trying to understand how if you fail to make the right choices at one point in a nation's history, it can come back to really haunt you in the future. And I think today we're facing the same kind of choices, but hopefully we'll do better than we did then.
Yeah, because you know, we entitled the show Gambling on the Economy, and we're not talking just about gambling, or we won't be talking about that only, but it is how the policymakers, whether in government or business, gamble on the economy by putting everything, hitching it to tourism primarily, of course military and some agriculture, but then they were thinking that probably tourism is going to go on forever and ever more, and Hawaii will be a great paradise forever and ever more. So that's the kinds of things that we would like to be talking about. Larry, I know you are an observer of the legislature, and here now the legislature is in session trying to fix the economy and fix Hawaii, so to speak, politically and so on. I would like to start with your comment on what is on the Elmo regarding Caetano's last State of the Union. State of the State urges putting politics aside. State of the State, State of the State urges putting politics aside. So, from your observation thus far of the legislature, what can we say about that? Is that coming to pass, or?
Not really. I think Governor Caetano's speech was sort of nostalgic, but once it was over, the knives came out all over again. Mm-hmm. For one thing, the Republicans are trying to make the Democrats look bad enough so that they can at least gain a majority in the House. Mm-hmm. Since they have 19 members, they're able to pull stuff from committees according to the House rules. And they've repeatedly done that. Just today they did that on the amendment regarding the Hurricane Relief Fund. So they keep trying to embarrass the Democrats and push what they hope will be good issues in the next election.
Yeah. Well, we have, in fact, a tape, some footage that we interviewed Ira Roter, who also is an observer of the legislature. So if the tape is ready, we can roll and then we can discuss that. If the tape is ready, we'll
longer storyline is you have a party which has been in power for almost 50 years now, the Democratic Party, and increasingly has been gridlocked in inability to change anything. They have these established relationships between powerful groups, business community, developers, banks, the tourism industry, and the unions. And all these people have conflicting interests, and so it becomes very difficult to get any agreement to move everybody forward. So it's been, I think, pretty obvious that they're not capable of leading the state. The governor is not capable of leading the state. He doesn't have the vision of any kind of master plan, nor does he have the people skills to make it happen. So you're in a situation where it's become very apparent that the Democratic Party is kind of leaderless in a way. The Republicans have stepped in this situation where the emperor has no clothes. They are providing an alternative candidates. The legislature, they took 9 new seats they won last year. I've been predicting, watching how that election unfolded, the kind of organization that they put into finding good candidates, training them, giving them money, that they're, I think, likely to take over the House.
The Republicans.
And the Republicans will be the majority. And that is very scary to the Democrats, and you've got a group down there, the old Democrats, the leaders of the Democratic Party, don't really know what to do. They are not terribly imaginative in terms of thinking about new economic enterprises and stuff like that, but more than that, they're sort of embedded in these entangling relationships. There are younger Republicans and there are younger Democrats who are trying to move something forward, and you'll see some things coming out on education, for example. People like Brian Schatz, and over in the Senate side, somebody like Kalani English. So it's an interesting dance down there, and as I was telling you, the prime directive is called re-election or get elected.
Okay, Noel, our writer, was saying that the party is leaderless. He's talking about the Democratic Party, and there's no vision to rule the state or govern the state. So isn't it a bit late to say that about Cayetano? He'll be leaving pretty soon, really. So what have we got to say about that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, Ira's right. The Democratic Party has been in power a very long time, and there were some accomplishments, at least in the first 15 to 20 years, but I think they've been hanging on for a very long time without really any vision or any reason except, just the plain fact of political power. And unfortunately, the Republicans don't represent a really viable alternative. Historically they've been a Hawaiʻi party, and they're trying to widen their base at this point. But they still remain a party of the upper middle class. They really don't have much to say to working people, certainly. And what we have at this point is a political vacuum. We have very serious issues of economic meltdown, environmental degradation, Native Hawaiian issues, which really aren't being addressed by anybody in the political spectrum, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, and Larry, the corruption that's been happening in the legislature and even on the city council doesn't, compounds those kinds of problems of no leadership, no vision, and all that kind of stuff. So I understand you have sponsored or co-sponsored or pushed for some bills to reform this political process. And so
okay, well, let's back up a little bit, though, and certainly Democrats have lost some momentum, which they're trying to regain. Okay. But if you look at the Republicans, you don't see a really comprehensive program either, to be frank. And that was one reason Linda Lingle didn't win the election in 1998. She criticized the Democratic Party, but she didn't really articulate a positive alternative. And if the positive alternative is that of the National Republican Party, anti-abortion, cut taxes for the rich, and things like that, that's not going to fly very well. So they're going to have to articulate a positive program to really win. Now, as to corruption, that's also bipartisan. We've called Republicans and Democrats to task equally. But I think a combination of things has happened. Number one, we've been pounding at them for a few years on these reforms. Number two, the corruption cases have made them uneasy and also made them realize that they need to do something. And of course, the election is coming up, so they want to look good to their constituents. So all those have sort of come together, and stuff that has been stalled for years is now suddenly moving forward. So, for instance, one of the most pernicious practices is when contractors give campaign contributions to candidates or to incumbents, hoping to get an edge in future contracts. That happens a lot. Some of them get no-bid contracts as a result, and so forth. This year, they're moving a bill to stop that. They're also moving a bill to stop direct contributions from corporations. They would have to go through political action committees, which are much more transparent. There's one bill which you wouldn't think we need, and that is to require candidates to be residents of their districts before they run.
Oh.
Believe it or not, it is not required. You only have to be a candidate on the day, a resident on the day of the general election.
Is that true?
Yeah.
How is that,
And
how's
we've been
that
pushing
possible?
that for 4 years,
That's
and
bizarre.
looks like that will finally go through this year. Well, there was one candidate this year who very frankly admitted he didn't live in his district and only moved in after he won the election. There's also a bill to recall legislators. This already exists in the city council, but it would, follow the usual procedure. If you get a certain number of signatures, you have a recall election, you could pull the legislator. A couple of legislators, Marshall Ige, for instance, he had a 4-year term. When he was convicted, he stayed in after that. I think people would have pulled him if they'd had the chance.
Sure. In fact, we have at the Elmo, for instance, this headline from February 11th, reform bills popular now. So these are some of the ones you are talking about. Others that
well,
that
there's
have
one.
support?
There's one cosmetic one to require ethics training for the legislators. I suppose that would help. At least they couldn't claim ignorance.
Can you train someone for ethics?
Well, at least you can tell them what's not allowed. For instance, this business in the city council special election where they claim they didn't know that you can't send out electioneering with absentee ballots. If you at least have run them through a course, they can't claim ignorance. So it could help.
Oh, yeah. Okay, then you're talking about how the, Noel, you were talking earlier about how, the Republicans trying to be for the common man or something like that. Ira also talked about that. We have this tape footage from the Representative Fox at the legislature, and he was talking about the general excise tax, and you think that he's just really went all the way for the poor, and he no longer is a representative of the upper classes in Hawaii. So the tape is ready, so we can take a look at it and then comment on it.
This bill has the advantage of taking us back to where we were in 1995. So the figures in the bill, which are exactly where the law were in 1995, are very familiar to the people of Hawaii, tax filers and those that have come along since. It is a tax credit in the area of medical services that many of us use. The food credit is reserved exclusively for those of very low income. It phases out as your income goes up. And as the previous speaker pointed out, it's very much in line with what we need to correct the most regressive forms of the general excise tax that we currently have in place. This is a bill that restores what the governor's action in 1995 amounted to the largest tax increase in the history of the state of Hawaii. That was a very, very unfortunate tax increase. It compounded the problem for the people of Hawaii to have that additional revenue taken out of their pockets and contributed to the sharp decline that our economy took in 1995.
So what Fox is saying makes him look credible, as a defender of the little guy, as we say. So any comments on this? No?
Well, obviously it's partisan politics. It's an attempt to play a kind of populist rhetoric and draw people in. My sense is that there's been a real sea change since September 11th, and I think what's been revealed is that Hawaii really doesn't have much of an economy. That our economic structures are so vulnerable and so dependent upon people getting on airplanes and traveling 4,000, 5,000, 7,000 miles away to a remote archipelago in the Pacific. And obviously what happened in September 11th will reoccur in some future point, maybe not in terms of terrorism, but certainly in terms of economic meltdown on the mainland or other places, some sort of genuine economic crisis. So we're left holding the bag with an industry that's a dominant industry which is incredibly vulnerable to global forces, and in which our people are basically dependent for their sustenance. And we can foresee a time when there could be a real economic catastrophe in Hawaii in terms of unemployment. I mean, and so it's nice that Representative Fox is offering, this, but basically the larger question of how do we diversify this this tourism-driven economy? How do we move away from an industry which no longer serves us well? Is the question that people should be doing. And what we don't hear in the public arena is any kind of discourse about this, about diversification and about the attempt to give us the kind of balanced economy that can provide us with some kind of sustaining long-term
vision. Well, I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I think we hear a lot about it, but we haven't seen much action. You know, for 30 years we've been hearing about diversifying the economy, but in fact we're still basically exporting our location, either for the military or for tourism. And there have been some small attempts to develop a high-tech industry and so forth, but at the same time they've been starving the university.
Right.
And you certainly can't develop a high-tech industry with a starvation diet at the university. As for the excise tax, it is regressive, but don't forget it was the Democrats that first suggested that this be eliminated. Now the Republicans have appropriated it, so we got to take that with a little skepticism too. And also remember that the reason the governor repealed those excise tax credits and the food tax credit and so forth was because we were facing a real big budget crunch. And I think that's the other failure, is that there's really not been a successful movement to trim the government and make it run more efficiently. You can see some of that at the city level, but the state level it's been completely bogged down and really hasn't gone anywhere.
Yeah, but what Noel was talking about actually is the idea of the policymakers and the planners in the private sector have really gambled on the economy in terms of what we said earlier, tourism primarily, and then they locked in the Hawaiian economy into in such a way that it is rather impossible to get out of it, especially if much of the control on the economy is beyond us, beyond our shores. So what can you do?
As Noel pointed out in his previous book, we're at the mercy of outside capital. A lot of that money leaves. Gambling would do even more of that, But originally tourism was seen as a diversification out of sugar.
That's true.
Sure.
And so it seemed like a good idea at the time. But now tourist locations all over the world, including some of the oldest in Europe, are finding that too much tourists ruin the location, and they're looking at regulating the number of tourists that can come through. So I agree. We need a real emphasis. Look, we've been talking diversified agriculture for how long? 30 years I've been hearing talk about diversified agriculture, and we still have very little. Call centers is ridiculous because those are low-paying jobs. That's not going to help anyone. They've got to be more imaginative.
Right. Let's hear. There's another footage on Representative Kahikina's response to Fox's on the GET, General Excise Tax. So let's go.
Let's discuss what House Bill 1583 does. By the way, I do support these tax credits. Since September 11, the attack on terrorism on our freedom. It is a call for leadership to stand tall and do what is right. Madam Speaker, House Bill 1583 provides a flat $55 per person refundable food tax credit. It also provides a refundable graduated food tax credit for those with an average gross income of under $30,000. It provides a refundable 4% annual excise tax, and it also provides a refundable 6% nursing facility tax. How much does it cost? Nobody told me how much it costs. From DOT, from the Department of Tax, the fact on the food tax credit will cost us $53 million. Where are we going to get the $53 million? There is a House Bill, House Bill 163, House Draft 1, which was passed by the House last year, provided a much more generous and progressive tax credit than what is proposed in this legislation.
Well, here you go. This is basically the Democratic response to Fox's on the Republican on the general excise tax. So it is clear to me, at least, that it was posturing on this on the part of the Republican regarding this, especially after what Larry was talking about. That even like Kahikina, he was for that bill, but since September 11th, things changed. So anything else that we can say about
they're facing a deficit of $150 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't do any tax cuts or program increases, either one. And they don't know where they're going to get the $150 million as it is.
Yeah. And here we have, like on the Elmo, this at the time when there's a budget crunch and all that kind of stuff, Ko'olina developer seeks tax credits. He wants to rob, the revenue part of the budget because of the stuff that he's doing in Ko'olina. So any kind of ideas about this? Any response? Noel?
Well, part of the globalization strategies of corporations basically is to have government de-emphasize regulation and have them provide all kinds of subsidies. So in Hawaii, we've seen the Miss Universe contest and the Baywatch TV program, and these multinationals can play different sites off against each other in a very destructive way. It happens in Hawaii. It happens in South Carolina. It happens everywhere. And the problem is that is absolutely disastrous to community integrity and to basically keeping any kind of stable economic base that can sustain people. So that's the challenge that we really have in Hawaii, basically to begin to create serious middle-class jobs once again, and to develop industries that have some degree of local control and local integrity. And the tragedy with tourism is that we have not been able to use it as an instrument of our development, that overseas corporations have used tourism for their benefit and for their high profitability, but we haven't been able to use it to do what we want to do as a society. And perhaps that's a conversation that we need to have also. And if you look at the sort of cracks that are developing in our social structure with the fairly wealthy upper middle class, the Jaguar set, and then a large number of people, especially who with kids in the public schools, who are just hanging on. Some of whom, in the recent downturn, becoming homeless or becoming really endangered. We're really moving into a dual society that's very dangerous for social stability, democracy, and also the sort of ethnic relations that we prize in Hawaii, because a disproportionate number of those people are going to be Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian, are going to be Samoan, are going to be Pacific Islander, and that puts the sort of ethnic, harmonious ethnic society that we treasure in real danger.
Yeah, in fact, that's the problem, how the economy really affects the other social dimensions of society, ethnic relations and all that kind of stuff.
Well, one good thing that did happen was that they rejected gambling again. And I think everyone realized that this would be a real disaster as far as social problems and so forth and so on. So, I got to give them credit for listening to widespread public opinion on that and refusing.
Good thing you mentioned the gambling thing, because we're gonna go. The next footage is on gambling. Ira Rotor also talking about this, and then we can comment on it. So if the tape is ready.
The gambling thing is, if you put together what you think would be the ideal new diversified economy, ecologically balanced, and people are locally employed and so forth, you discover that the gambling industry is a black hole, that it sucks money out of the state. Furthermore, it has such havoc associated with it. The results are in now. This is like talking about tobacco. They are creating pathological and problem gamblers at a rate that's growing every year in the United States. We would double the number of problem gamblers that we have in Hawaii if we bring in casinos. And I say that with very certainty because that's the results of studies that have been coming out for years and years. For every $1 we get in tax revenue, we would at best lose $2 in social costs, tangible economic social costs that are measurable. Bankruptcies, what it costs to treat people in counseling, credit, wipeouts and crime and all sorts of stuff is there. That's the lowest number. The more realistic number is probably 6.5. And you've got this incredibly horrible product, but you've got this group of investors from South Africa, Caribbean, Atlantic City, Mohawk Indians in Connecticut. That's one group who are talking about this mega resort. They're going to build this fantasy. It's bizarre, it is gaudy, it is beyond Disneyland. And they need a casino in order to make that work. They're going to hire all kinds of people up in Waianae and stuff. You have a second group from Detroit, and they have built the Detroit casinos. They're involved with pizza parlors, and it's a conglomerate. And these teams of lobbyists have descended on Hawaii and are lobbying desperately, have people who are paid petitioners and go out and collect signatures. Don't you think that we should have more money for the schools, more money for social services, or this or that? Oh yeah, well, don't you think gambling would bring in lots of money? Oh, that sounds good to me. Yeah, I'll sign on it. So they've gotten maybe 25,000 signatures. People don't know. We've had people with T-shirts. They brought in a busload of retired workers to have these T-shirts, Save Education, promote gaming. Yeah. And they thought we were talking about bingo and stuff like that. They didn't know gambling casinos. Well, we didn't know about that. But they thought they were just promoting education. So it's a massive mainland-style public relations operation.
So here we go, Noel. These developers come prey on the emotions of the people because we are in a weak situation economically, no revenues to speak of, and so forth. And these big guys from South Africa, elsewhere, they come over here. And I know you have some opinions on this that maybe you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I think this situation will get more and more dangerous if the economy, Larry's talking about the lack of political vision and the lack of political alternatives at this point, and we know that the global economy isn't going to get any better next year or two, obviously. I mean, it's really in a bad slump, and the Japanese market, which is so critical, is really stagnating. So we're going to hear next year they'll be back again, and this is a fight that those of us who are against gambling will have to take on for the foreseeable future. I was in South Africa last summer at an academic conference about globalization, and I was nosing around because I knew that the Kerzner interests were really, and the Sun International were really critical players in this whole gambling venture in Hawaii. They're the people who want to build this huge, Ira was referring to this huge casino resort at Ko'olina. And what I discovered is that it's public record that in 1986, Sal Kerzner bribed the Transkei government with about $400,000 of monies to obtain entree for his Sun International to build Sun City. Kerzner lied about the case for years, and then a few years later admitted that he had paid extortion monies. Later, it turns out that one of the reasons Kerzner had not been prosecuted by the South African government is that he contributed about $600,000 to the African National Congress for the 1994 election campaign. So this is a guy who's, and the Kerzner interests are really into, political payoffs, bribery, manipulation of the worst kind. So then Kerzner goes into Atlantic City, and ultimately he gets into Indian gaming with the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut, where they built a $275 million casino on homeland. Now the deal with the Indians has been just awash with corruption, profiteering. It turns out the girlfriend of the federal regulator who sanctioned this, the deal, the guy on the Indian Gaming Commission, received a well-paid Kerzner job. Some of the tribal leaders were put on the Kerzner payroll before while the Indian tribe was negotiating, and ultimately a sweetheart contract was signed, which gave the Indian tribe very little and gave the Kerzner interests a great deal. So the Kerzner Company, which is the trading cove, called Trading Cove, has really made out like bandits in this whole process. So these are the people who basically are talking about coming to Hawaii, and my first reaction is, do we want the Kerzners doing business in this state? I mean, with that kind of record of bribery, corruption, payoffs, do we really need them? I mean, what can we expect in terms of what will be their relationship to the political process here?
Yeah.
It's a pretty slimy business. Right. It's like tobacco guys saying that tobacco will help the economy, but they're counting the hospital costs of people dying and stuff like that as helping the economy. The testimony I give every year is the problems my niece had in Oregon, where they don't even have private gambling; they have state gambling, and she has developed a gambling problem. She tried to commit suicide once, and I pointed out that all these, quote, stimulate the economy. You know, ambulance fees, hospital fees, counseling
Good for the
fees.
GNP.
Stimulate the economy, you know. And it is a very sophisticated effort. They've hired a lot of lobbyists. They've spread a lot of money around the community, the ruling class community, let's say. And they've kind of tried to do it underground, but the anti-gambling coalition has so far turned them back every time.
Yeah.
But they'll be back, I agree, every year. You know what I think? I think it's not that just that they want the business. I think they're angry that this is one of the last two states where they can't do it, and they feel they're entitled to go anywhere. So I think it's become a matter of pride with them that they can roll over Hawaii too.
Yeah, after all, we're in a global world, right?
Yeah, we can do whatever we want, anywhere we want. You know,
It's an interesting coalition, though, isn't it? I mean, we have, when I was
yeah.
testify, we have Mormons, religious people,
Yes.
you know, there's people on the left, there's all sorts of academics, people like Ira, all sorts of people.
People who
And it's,
fought each other
for years, yeah.
fiercely on gay marriage are now in a very tight alliance against gambling. It's very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, but you know, two things on this. One is talking about leadership. Yeah, I mean, Caetano said, "Let's leave it for the people." All of a sudden, he becomes like one who believes in like a referendum and all that kind of stuff. Let's leave it for the people to decide whether they want gambling or not. So I think, to me, this is like a cop-out, you know, the way I look at it.
He's waffled on that,
right.
yeah. But, you know, the majority of the legislators realize that, you know, this wouldn't be a good thing. And so they have, even the leadership has waffled sometimes. But I give credit, the majority of the legislators are not going to allow it.
And why did he go to the Caribbean, Caetano, with other people?
Yeah. To see
so
the
is that
aquarium.
The aquarium?
To see the aquarium. That was the official explanation.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was not good. I agree.
Yeah,
Can you
so
imagine?
that's-
Can you imagine the amount of money Kerzner and the gambling interests will spend on the referendum to push it through? I mean, it's they'll spend huge amounts of money to persuade the people of Hawaii that gambling's in their interest. you know, and,
So that's been turned back another year. So let's hope that continues.
And it also shows you bankruptcy of the political elite in this state to do anything at all to fix the economy. I mean, the little control they have, they can't do anything with it if they just push gambling. They're going again with this global capital and the robbing of Hawaii through the gambling. You know, ventures,
Well,
and that is a very bad thing for Hawaii.
What they have to do to succeed in diversifying the economy and strengthening the economy will take a long time, several elections, and that is their horizon.
Yeah.
That is their event horizon, you know, and it will take several elections. So they've done some things, you know, trying to develop movie industry, trying to develop high tech, but not nearly enough. And you know, that's a problem because a lot of them have a short-term focus.
And like you say, it's the underlying infrastructure. I mean, unless we have a strong K-12 education system,
Right.
unless we have a strong university, high tech is not going to be a reality here.
Yeah.
You know, and that is something which has to be developed over a long
That
period
is
of time.
considered by people in the field as an amenity of whatever location they're going to. First thing they're going to ask about is the schools and universities, you know. And unless you have a really top-notch university, they aren't going to come because they don't want to have to send their kids away and stuff like that, you know. So that's been very short-sighted. That was the first thing they hit when the budget cuts were a problem. Very short-sighted.
Yeah. Well, there's another legislation, the Hurricane Relief Fund, and to show you the combat or the dogfight between the Republicans and the Democrats on that. So we have Ira Roter also commenting on the Hurricane Relief Fund, and then we also can comment on that. So if the tape is ready.
There may be a third solution to it, and I mean, the governor is saying, here's some money, let's rate it, because we have this immediate need, and there's no hurricane now. I mean, to me, it's the question of when the hurricane comes to the islands, and particularly places like here, and we're going to need that hurricane fund, because we're not going to lose. We're going to lose insurance. The Republicans giving it away is stupid, because then what are you going to do to reestablish that fund? And the third solution is to not raid the fund, to take some of the money that's in the fund and use it for preventative upgrading of people's houses. You can do a lot to reinforce existing homes, which are...
Yeah. So actually, before we go on the to comment on this, we have a caller, Donna from Hauula. Oh, that's where I live. Okay. So yes, Donna.
Yeah, being that you represent some of the most intelligent minds in the community, my question was, should the Hawaiian society ever actually gain justice for what was done over 108 years ago, and were able to be reinstated into the independent nation they once were? Can you see through your brain tank that has all this real important information, the benefits of becoming independent?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks, Donna. Donna talking about independence for Hawaii. If we have all those problems, and is there a benefit for going the independence route, or at least some kind of self-determination for the native Hawaiians and for the rest of us here?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think the United States will ever allow that. Pearl Harbor is much too valuable an asset. I don't think the United States has ever given away anything, any land it's gotten. So that's not going to happen. I think what's going to happen, the question is what can be done within the context of the United States. And I really think a nation within a nation type structure could help the economy a lot and help everyone, not just Native Hawaiians, because if Native Hawaiians had a land base, they could start their own economic development. And I think that, and since Native Hawaiians are among the poorest people in the state, I think that would pull the whole state up. So I think it's a crime that through how many administrations they haven't negotiated a good land settlement to allow Native Hawaiians to do that.
Noel, any comments on this?
Well, I think we're sitting on Native Hawaiian land right here.
Probably.
This is ceded land, so
Probably.
I mean, it's talking about how relevant this is. Just Larry has my sentiments here, but I think what I might say is that one sees the values enunciated by Kakuni Blaisdell and other Native Hawaiian leaders, and those are values which are communal, which value relationships, which value linkages between individuals, which talk about engagement within community, which are really against the grain of the sort of conventional American values of individualism and greed, and the sort of Kenneth Lay,
Mr.
Enron values that we see paraded every day. And to me, having those values as part of an ongoing political process would be really marvelous, because it holds out a whole different value structure of how not only people might live, but also how political entities might look at the world and treat their citizens. So I would welcome that. I mean, I think what we need is a sharp break from the sort of dominant political and individual values which we have in this country today.
Yeah. Well, I have a quick comment. First of all, in terms of self-determination, I'm in 100% support of self-determination for the Kanaka Maoli. So I leave this to the Native Hawaiians, the Kanaka Maoli, to decide what they want to do, regardless of whether it is the U.S. won't allow them to do it or not. I mean, that is not the question. The question is what they themselves would determine in a free and unbiased election, not controlled by military forces and all that kind of military and police powers that the state has. So I leave it to them. But I think the communal nature of the Native Hawaiians before Captain Cook, before contact, I mean, it has a lot to offer for us at this point in terms of the communal thing and in terms of what might be possible beyond the selfish kind of nature of the dog-eat-dog society, Well, so and we can see this at the legislation, that now dogfights between Republicans and Democrats, and both of them gambling on the economy, in fact, to try and maybe win the next election and perhaps satisfy their own political bases.
The irony is that Western values are coming around to agree with Native Hawaiian values. Excessive individualism is now seen as a dead end. excessive, rape of the land is seen as a dead end and so forth. So the West is finally coming to understand its the limits on its values.
Yeah. So in terms of what Ira was talking about, the question of the Hurricane Relief Fund, any update on that?
Just today, I just heard on the radio coming over that they aren't going to return the fund. We probably need it. I agree with Ira there, because eventually a hurricane is going to hit Oahu instead of Kauai.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, we're in deep kimchi.
Yeah.
But we should have a rainy day fund anyway. Any state should have one, and that's part of the government reform that's been neglected. We should have, during the fat years, we should have been accumulating a rainy day fund, so when something like this happened, we would have something to fall back on.
Well, we had one during the Waihe years, and then they were rebates to the taxpayers, right?
Yeah, right.
And that
$1
don't forget, a number of government employees increased by 43% in those 8 years too.
Yeah.
So basically, they spent it all.
Yeah. Okay. We have here another kind of unimaginative or perhaps imaginative way of trying to deal with the economy here, in support of course, not the employee or the worker, but the corporation. And here I'm talking about the question of the merger between Hawaiian and Aloha. And in fact, it's interesting here on the Elmo. It says Anzai's spouse lobbied for merger, and here they're talking about the merger between Hawaiian and Aloha. So we also have a tape. We interviewed Liana Petronik, who wrote a dissertation on the question of mergers in the airlines, and with Hawaiian as a case study. But also she's a flight attendant for Hawaiian Airlines, and the tape is kind of interesting.
The airline industry did not do very well last year. In fact, they're projecting losses between $3 to $6 billion for the industry as a whole. In fact, United Airlines, the latest figures were that they would be losing over $1 billion, just United Airlines alone, because of the slowdown in the economy and the drop in tourism, and also other factors as well. The airlines have to look at ways in order to maintain stability, economic stability. So one of the ways that they can do that is by going through a merger. If you look back in history, starting like, for instance, in the 80s, when after deregulation, one of the cost-saving measures that the airlines did universally was concessions bargaining. And even that was not enough to save the industry, and we went through a period of downsizing and re-engineering. And then during the late 80s, there was hostile takeovers and mergers throughout the industry. So the thing is, people have to realize that we live in a capitalist system, and if you live in a capitalist system, you are subject to the fundamentals of capital reproduction. And if you do not make a profit, what's going to happen is you're going to be history. So industry as a whole, throughout the economy, will have to look at ways in which they can save money, be more productive. Labor is one of the highest costs that they have within the airline industry, and probably throughout the whole economic sector. When we had the concession struggles and when we had re-engineering throughout the airline industry, they've become pretty effective and efficient in cutting down labor. So the only other alternative at this point of time is to look at a merger. And Greg Brenneman, who is leading the charge on the merger effort, has come out and said that the industry locally would save approximately $90 million if the merger goes through. So of course, this is going to be really good for the industry, Aloha and Hawaiian, the stockholders, the CEOs, but this is going to have a negative impact on the employees. Because
well, there you go, Noel. Here's another gem that they present us with. So any comments on this?
Well, the studies of mergers seem to indicate that one of the motivating forces is to displace or RIF or fire as many employees as possible, and I think that's what will happen here also. So the benefits of this merger may be that the companies, or the new company, the reformed, reconsolidated company, is in a stronger market position. Obviously, it's going to be a monopoly, but that many employees lose their jobs, and you know, basically the burden of the company's finances are going to be shouldered by both workers, both employees, and also by the public in terms of ultimately of higher fares. As the so-called free market disappears. You know, they're talking about a 2-year cap on fares, but obviously as a palliative to make it, you know, amenable.
Yeah.
But after that, what happens? I mean, you know, the sky's the limit, and I think that's what people are really, and many people are dependent for their, you know, just for their economic livelihoods on having to fly back and forth, you know, once or twice a week, and I think they're going to be in real trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you know, there's this Citizens for Competitive Air Travel. They collected up till now 20,000 plus signatures against you know, the merger. But it's also interesting. Inoue had a piece in the one of the local papers saying that this is the best way for Hawaii to go, and that's Inoue, and so he carries a lot of weight here. So did you hear anything else beyond that?
I don't know what they're going to do at the ledge, if anything. But you know, when I agree with Liana's comments. You know, once deregulation happened, you had this explosion of mergers and takeovers. Nationally, we're down to about 3.5 airlines now, and the same thing could happen here. And you know, the obvious solution when you have a monopoly situation is to have some sort of government regulation. But so far, there doesn't seem to be much prospect of that. And if you think they're not going to raise the fares, or they're only going to cut 10% of the people, guess again. Guess again. They're going to do retirement buyouts to get rid of people. They're going to cut a lot more than 10%
This is the
of their employees.
This is the worst possible situation.
Yeah.
An unregulated market with you know, an unregulated monopoly.
An unregulated monopoly.
Yeah, it's
so definitely all kinds of fare increases and so forth.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they also say no fare increases for 2 years for the Kama'aina. But what about the tourist who comes here? I mean, that would negatively impact tourism, because people say, oh, why would I want to pay another $200 to go and visit one of the neighbor islands? You know, forget it. I go somewhere else, Mexico or wherever. But interesting also that Abercrombie is coming out against it, against the merger. So here we have, you know, Inoue, the godfather, you know, and so on. And then Abercrombie, in a sense, you know, one protege of Inoue's, but he's like kind of breaking away. Any kind of sense of why that is going on? Or
well, Abercrombie's a politician. I think he senses the fact there's a groundswell of opposition, and you know, he's concerned about you know, the election in November, and I think basically he wants to court the anti-merger vote, and I think the anti-merger vote is very large. So yeah, I think it's basically an opportunistic development. I don't see Abercrombie, by the way, as a progressive. Abercrombie was the only Hawaii legislator, you know, in Congress to vote for Bush's tax bill, which is an outright giveaway of you know, of billions of dollars to the upper classes in this country. But in this case, he's playing the populist, I think, in a very opportunistic way.
Yeah, and you know, last election showed that he was in a precarious position. I mean, he just barely squeaked through. And so he's looking for his interest in this, very narrow interest in this way. Okay, there's another piece, footage about, you know, the merger, also Liana talking, so we can watch that.
I applaud the Hawaiian airline employees that are trying to resist this merger, because, like I said, it's going to have an adverse effect on everyone within Hawaiian and Aloha. But then the other thing is we have to look at the economic picture. And as with Star Bulletin, they were able to save the newspaper. But then, if you look at what happened, I think if I remember correctly, they took major concessions in a lot of areas, and a lot of people were laid off. As it is, we already have people laid off at Hawaiian Airlines and Aloha Airlines, but I think if we look at the economic picture in the state and the nation as a whole, and the tourist industry, and what a huge loss it's taken just recently, especially after 9/11, I don't think the local market can sustain itself. Xander came out with some figures saying that Hawaiian Airlines in the last 3 years had lost over 39 million, and they themselves had lost over 3 million. And these do not include the 2001 figures, which I think are even going to be higher. And also,
yeah, Xander is the Aloha Airlines chief, so he was commenting on the losses and why it is natural for them to go for the merger, you know. But this is the problem here. I mean, capital is faced with a certain reality, and they have to do it that way, you know, in terms of a merger. But here it shows, you know, the opposition between the interest of the worker and the interest of the stockholder and so on. So this is something that we need to look at. So we are not like all brothers and sisters trying to solve a problem. You know, they want to solve the problem on the backs of the worker, and that's why workers are in opposition to the merger itself. So this is quite a predicament.
Well, I think
Larry?
if you, I think you know, you need sort of a medium thing, and I think a certain amount of regulation and capitalism can actually make it work better. That's something that some enlightened capitalists admit and
like
understand.
George Soros. Yeah, George Soros does that.
So there's, when you have an unusual situation like a monopoly, it should be regulated. Now look what happens when you don't. Look at the cable industry. When the Republicans in the Congress deregulated the cable industry, rates went up considerably, average 30 or 40% nationwide, because those are usually monopolies.
But you see the contradiction within the way the economy organized, you know, in a capitalist way. Here you're talking about free market, and the free market brings about a necessity to merge, to have a monopoly. So the free market produces its opposite, which is, you know, a monopoly. And this is, I mean, really not only ironic, but contradictory, and shows the problems within capital.
In 1776, Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations, the first thing that businessmen do when they get together is conspire how to fix prices, you know. And so whether they form a cartel or whether they form a monopoly, I think it's always in their interest to see how they can raise the prices as much as they can. Sure.
But this trend toward concentration is a global trend. There's increasing concentration of capital. You get companies like Chrysler, you know, allying with, merging with Daimler, you know, Daimler-Benz, and intercontinental types of mergers taking place. So this Aloha or whatever merger is basically driven by worldwide forces of capital and consolidation.
And of course, the Hawaii companies are dwarfed by all this. There was another news item this week that the last Dillingham subsidiary here is up for sale. The so-called Big Five that used to dominate the Hawaii economy completely are now just bit players. Most of them are out of business, have been taken over by outside companies, whatever. They're not a factor anymore.
Yeah, speaking of George Soros, I mean, it's really interesting. Here we have this guy, financier, who made his billions on the free market and finance, etc., and turning world currencies into commodities, which he buys and sells, and you know, basically like ruining some countries like Malaysia. At least the Malaysians think that he was the culprit behind all that. Maybe they're a bit exaggerating with this, but here he is talking about capitalism is in crisis. He is not me or you or you. You know, capitalism is in crisis. We have to have those kinds of regulations. But I wonder why he would say that beyond the notion of capitalism in crisis. I mean, is there something that, you know, is he really for a democratic kind of system of capitalism, or is he for a system that really controls things much more so to his liking, saves capitalism, and yet like gives some crumbs to the poor, etc.? Any ideas about that? No?
I think he's torn.
I think he's conflicted too.
Yeah, he feels
really
guilt.
Conflicted.
He feels guilt.
He feels guilty, you think?
He's given away $150 million for universities.
Oh, he's giving away his whole fortune in the next 10 years. Yeah,
and he helped ruin the pound about 10 years ago. Made $1.5 billion in 2 days.
Sold short on a pound.
Sold short on a pound and basically wiped out the Bank of England there. And so I think he's just conflicted. I agree with Noel. And you know, it's interesting that he's a professional speculator, and especially in currencies. And he's the one who says that markets are inherently stable. That's how I make money, he says, because they're unstable. And I make money by being logical when everyone else is being illogical. But when he proposed some regulation of international currency speculation, the Americans who dominate the World Bank and all shot that down totally. But the interesting thing is that very quietly in the European community and other places, proposals are being circulated to do this. I got to tell you something funny. On McNeil Lehrer one night, they had the Thai foreign minister. And
the Lehrer report now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Whatever. I'm out of date. Okay. And he was on the same show with Lawrence Summers, who had been previously deputy Treasury Secretary. And it was Lawrence Summers who, when the Thai baht first got in trouble, which was the beginning of the Asian meltdown, had said, no, we're going to let the free market decide, and didn't help, and then took a lot more help later on because they didn't nip it early. When Larry Summers came on, the director cut to the Thai foreign minister's face, and you never saw such a look of hatred and loathing in your whole life. It was amazing. It was amazing. Then he put on a good face, called him Larry, and so forth. But I think, when somebody like Soros says that international currency speculation has to be regulated, you have to listen.
Trillions of dollars ricocheting around the globe. It's incredible amounts of money.
In a very, illogical and unreasonable way.
So here, two questions come to mind. One is that in all this mess, of global capital, and how Hawaii would want to ever dream of controlling its own economy, and trying to have the legislature bring about certain legislation that can really put it on a path to recovery. Any kind of bills that you're looking for this session, for instance, that begin to do that, Larry?
Oh, wow. I haven't been following the economics bills that much, but I think that the good things they have done is try to encourage the movie industry and trying to encourage high tech. And I think they need to do a lot more of both of those. And they have to strengthen the university. I mean, those are the three things off the top of my head.
But, here again, in terms of the high-tech industry, I mean, there have been studies that say even if we get everything right, all the factors that are needed for having a high-tech industry, it's going to take 25 to 30 years to catch up.
That's what Guy Kawasaki said when he came here.
There's this article
10 elections.
This article by Herbig and Kramer a while back says the same thing, I mean, high-tech is going to take 25 to 30 years. This assumes that the rest of the world is standing still, not doing anything with high-tech, and already we have those kinds of
We could probably
areas.
develop a high-tech niche. We could probably develop a diversified agriculture niche. We could be exporting all sorts of strange fruits, for instance.
Of course.
Things like that, So, I mean, there are things we could do, but you haven't seen enough of it yet, let's put it that way.
But everything now we're going to be built on the strengths of Hawaii, which is tourism, which actually is its weakness as well, right?
Yes.
And that's what Caetano came to the realization, that everything around tourism with a little bit of, health tourism and this tourism and that tourism, education and so on. And then the problem is, we are here. We cannot have like another sector of the economy, high tech, that really can take the slack away from.
And also,
tourism.
there's some question whether we're even doing tourism right, because the latest studies show the Hawaii Tourism Authority is not doing a good job.
Okay, so we're basically
pessimistic.
done. Thank you for watching, and thank you for coming and sharing your ideas with us. Thank you very much. So.